Hello guys and welcome back to Dylan's Little Hobbies, and in today's video, I did it, guys. I did. I actually got the end goal for this tank. That will not be in today's video, that will be next week, but in next week's video, we're going to be talking about seahorses, guys. I got seahorses. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the coral that I actually got along with the seahorses. The coral that's going to be not only seahorse safe, but is going to be going into this aquarium. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and start talking about corals. So, I have to admit this. When I first started thinking about this aquarium, corals were not in my mind. I think reef aquariums and the reef in general are very beautiful and of course very interesting. Corals are really interesting animals. Yes, they are animals. They're not plants. They're not some other form of weird life. They're actual animals. They're actual animals. Indeed, corals refers to, actually most of them are a couple different animals. Every single polyp is indeed a type of animal. And did you know jellyfish are actually related to corals? Jellyfish actually start out as polyps and grow. So a baby jellyfish is actually a coral. Hilariously, there are a bunch of jellyfish that start out as polyps, and polyps are what corals are. Now that doesn't mean corals are going to magically turn into a jellyfish or anything, but it is interesting that they're cousins. It's actually really interesting because I once actually wanted to keep jellyfish, and maybe one day I will, because I do find them fascinating. I mean, they don't even have hearts or a brain, and yet they live. And indeed, polyps kind of don't either, and yes, polyps are indeed actual corals, and there's tons of different types as well. There's big polyps, small polyps, stony polyps. Some actually catch food and eat. Some just filter feed. Some just get their nutrients from the water. All corals actually have photosynthetic, and it's really weird. They have algae in their skin, and all corals, or at least the majority of them, actually get their color from the algae that grows in them. So the algae provides nutrients for them, and some corals can actually just survive just off your type of light, which is why corals need, of course, a very special aquarium light. But the fact is, that's insane to me, is that these are not plants. They are actual animals, and they do have nutrients coming from plants, but they're not plants themselves. And it's really, really kind of an odd animal to think about, isn't it? So, technically, when you consider a reef tank, reefs, we don't consider plants tank mates, right? But corals are technically tank mates, and some of them have defense mechanisms, a lot of dangerous defense mechanisms, in fact, for seahorses. Some of them sting, and some of them release chemicals into the water to fight other corals. Yes, you can have chemical warfare in your aquarium, and I know what you guys are thinking. You gotta think, is that because they want to eat their food, so they poison their food, they sting their food to eat, to catch their food? No, actually, they don't do that at all. Most of the time, they only strangely use their chemical warfare and their tentacles that can shock you, and all their venom and poison that's in their system. They only use this to fight for space. And it's really interesting that people keep them in such small reefs, because these animals, given time, can get extremely big. Extremely big. Now, granted, all corals, depending on which one you get, they can all kind of have a different growth rates. They like different type of lighting, just like with plants, some like highlight, some like low light, some like flow, some like low flow, and yeah, it's just really interesting. These animals are just really bizarre creatures. Fascinating. But I have to admit, while I was first looking for the seahorse tank, corals were not on my mind. I think they're beautiful. I think they are fascinating creatures. But when I look at my tank, I'm more interested in the fish than I am anything else. I mean, I think snails are cool. But I'm more interested in the fish. The only reason why I keep plants in my aquariums is for the health of the fish. Because I like the fact that it creates an ecosystem for them. And yeah, so do corals. Corals are just a different type of life that, again, just add to the ecosystem of your aquarium, which is just really kind of interesting. And the question is, are there any safe corals? And yes, there are indeed a couple of safe corals. So when I finally got to the point of, well, maybe I would do a coral. I mean, think about this. I have a marine light. My saltwater tank is indeed a marine set. It is saltwater ray. The light is capable of growing some corals. So I have a marine light. I use a Red Sea Blue bucket, which even says it can handle reef tanks, which is interesting. And I want coralline algae growing on the bottom of my tank, so I have seeded this tank with coralline algae, even though it's not growing extremely fast. I thought, what? If I can find a coral that I like the look of, that is easy to keep, because again, I'm a beginner fish keeper, and I'm keeping seahorses. I've chosen one of the quote-unquote out there, it's really not that hard, but I've chosen one of the most difficult species to keep out there, mostly because of how needy they are. I'm keeping one of the most difficult fish out there. As a beginner, I do not need to keep a really difficult to keep coral either, so it has to be beginner friendly. It has to be, of course, seahorse safe. I have to, of course, like the look of the coral, and it's gotta be interesting. When I look at it, it's gotta be something that I really just want to constantly look at. And there are actually a couple of different types of corals that I could get. The one that I got is a coral called pulsing Xenia. Now this is a really interesting coral because it actually pulses. Now a lot of people hate this coral. People refer this as to a weed coral because it grows rapidly fast. Apparently, it will be just slow growing for the beginning couple of weeks, and then all of a sudden you'll end up with the entire tank blown out with this coral. And that is possible because it does absorb so much nutrients so fast and grows so quickly. For a seahorse tank, that's actually a good thing, because if I can get any nutrient export out of my coral, out of anything in this aquarium for that matter, then it's only going to benefit the fish. So yeah, I'm alright if my coral tends to explode in growth. And in fact, what's interesting is this coral can indeed grow on the back of your glass. It can grow on glass, guys. So I'm hoping that I can get it to grow on the back panel of my aquarium. I think that would be great. I could keep it off of the rock. I can keep it contained there so it doesn't grow everywhere and take over my macros. But I can still have it. I can still have a coral in my tank, and I can handle the excess growth from it. So I think that will actually work, getting it to grow on the back of my glass. It's a really interesting coral because it actually does pulse. So a lot of corals don't do this unless like the water movement. But the thing about Xenia, pulsing Xenia at least, and there are a couple of different types of Xenia, some that don't pulse, but pom-pom Xenia, pulsing Xenia, actually pulses, and you think it's because they want to eat food or something like that. No, it's because in low flow areas, they want to, of course, have some flow around themselves. So to do that, they just do it themselves. They've grown to just start moving the water around them, to move flow around them, and of course that will of course help them feed, because that means more nutrients will be moving around them, getting to other parts of the coral, which is of course important, keeping the coral alive. This coral does actually need a lot of nutrition. However, in most beginner tanks, there's going to be a lot of nutrition, and especially in a seahorse tank, there's going to be tons of nutrition. So, tons of excess waste and stuff like that, causing the nutrition level to rise. I think my Xenia will do just fine. Now, a lot of people have problems with this coral. Yeah. Knock on wood, guys, knock on wood, that I do not. I hope that it does just well. There are other corals that I could get. I will simply say this: I have no interest. I have no interest in other corals at this time. I'm not gonna say no to getting other corals later on down the line, but right now, I'm fine with just starting out with this one little coral, and I actually bought it from the same place I bought the seahorses, which is Seahorse Savvy. It's really funny because like the coral frag was like $45, and then you could buy a whole colony for I swear it's crazy. She had a whole frag for $15 more than a whole colony for $15 more than the regular frag. So yeah, I bought a big colony for the tank, and now the question is, where's the placement? You know, where am I going to put this thing? And it's interesting because I never meant this to happen when I actually aquascaped this tank, right? But I have this rock that looks like a giant tree trunk, because when I bought my rock, I was expecting like 2 or 3 small pieces of branch rock. No, it came in a giant branch, and I had to break it in pieces and put it on my other rock to create my aquascape. But then I have this one piece of rock, which was of course like the root structure for the rest of the rest of the rock, and it looks like a tree trunk. So I placed it in the back of my tank, and I thought, okay, you know what, that looks cool. Maybe I'll grow some macroalgae on that and make a macroalgae tree. But then I kind of thought, it's right there on the back of the glass. What if I could just get a Xenia tree growing? Yes, so I bought the Xenia tree, the Xenia coral, and I placed it on my tree trunk rock. And of course I used reef glue, which is a type of underwater safe reef glue to use with corals. So I got some of that, and I put it on my rock, and I stuck the shell that the coral came on right on top of that rock and placed it back into place. And now I have a Xenia tree growing. That's pretty insane. And it's like a cool little pinkish color. It doesn't show up on camera, but it actually has like a blue tint to its fingers. I'm gonna call it fingers, you know, the ends of their polyps. It has like a blue tint to it. It looks really, really interesting. I really, really like this coral in my tank. Hopefully it grows great. Hopefully it goes well. And I really enjoy the look already. I can't wait for it to start growing on the back of the glass, and then eventually I have this whole like tree full of Xenia. I think that's going to be cool down the line, but we'll see how things go. That is it for today's video, and in my next video we of course are going to be getting the seahorses, guys. We're gonna be getting the seahorses in this tank. Oh boy. Thank you guys for watching, and I am out for now. Bye.